We can't delegate the safety of our friends, our family members, and our community to politicians and police officers and think that alone will resolve the problem. When future generations ask you what it was like to live through this period of anti-Asian hate and this pandemic, and what you did to make this country better, what will your answer be?
이 콘텐츠는 아시안 증오범죄 근절 프로그램의 일환으로 캘리포니아주에서 지원받아 제작되었습니다.
I'm Connie Chung Jo, the CEO of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Southern California, or AJ SoCal. We are the nation's largest civil rights and legal service organization for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. We serve over 15,000 clients a year. We're part of a national affiliation of 5 independent API nonprofit organizations that use the Advancing Justice brand. And these affiliates are located in Atlanta, Chicago, DC, and San Francisco. The Asian American and Pacific Islander community, or AAPI community, is the fastest growing racial group in the United States. We make up 7% of the nation's population. We're also the most diverse of all racial groups in this country, speaking the most different languages, having the largest number of different ethnicities, and the greatest diversity when it comes to income levels and educational rates. This is why we must dispel the model minority myth that treats us all like a monolith. Because while some in our communities are successful, the reality is there are great needs as well. For example, in our own Korean American community, we have the highest college attainment rates of almost any ethnic group in this country. Yet we also have the highest rate of being uninsured and coming from limited English proficient families. Moreover, what's important to note is no matter what your success is in this country, it does not insulate you from racism or discrimination, which we learned far too well during this pandemic. There have been more than 11,000 reported incidents of anti-Asian hate since the pandemic began. The largest targeted group are Chinese Americans, followed secondly by Korean Americans. Asian American women have been targeted 2 to 3 times more than Asian American men. It's important to know that throughout American history, there has been a pattern and practice of scapegoating those of Asian descent in this country, whether it's because of disease, national security, or economic competition. It's this forever foreigner or perpetual outsider myth, where Asian Americans are never truly seen as being American enough, and we're always looked a little bit like outsiders. It's why my own father-in-law, who is a US-born American citizen, decorated for his service as a Vietnam War veteran, was called a racial slur early on in the pandemic because he is of Asian descent. So let's go through some examples of this in American history. In 1871, you had the LA Massacre, where a mob of 500 people descended on LA's Chinatown, just 4 miles from where I'm standing today in Koreatown, killing 19 Chinese Americans, or about 10% of the community at that time. In 1882, you had the Chinese Exclusion Act that shut down immigration, first from China, and then expanding to ban immigration from all Asiatic countries, including Korea. In World War II, you had the incarceration of over 120,000 Japanese Americans in concentration camps. In 1982, there was a murder of Vincent Chin by 2 white auto workers who blamed the Japanese automobile industry for the economic decline that was happening in Detroit, Michigan. Despite the fact that Vincent was not of Chinese descent and he was a US-born citizen, the men beat him to death, and they never received a day in jail for the crime they committed. This sparked a whole generation of Asian American activism in this country, which included Stuart Kuo, who was the founder of my organization, AJ SoCal, then known as the Asian Pacific American Legal Center. After 9/11, we saw the surveillance and roundup of South Asians, Muslims, and Middle Easterners in a wave of Islamophobia. And in the beginning of 2020, we saw the rise in anti-Asian hate that resulted in the murders of Christina Yuna Lee in New York and the massacres of 8 women in the Atlanta spa shootings, 2 of whom were Korean Americans. Now, in 2023, we're seeing a new wave of anti-Asian hate resulting from the tensions between China and the US. Florida recently passed a ban for anyone of Chinese citizenry from purchasing land in their state, while some dozen other states are working on similar laws. These anti-Chinese land laws are disturbingly reminiscent of the California alien land laws in the early 1900s that prevented Asian Americans in California from owning land. AJ SoCal is combating this anti-Asian hate through a multi-pronged approach that provides both immediate services and support to victims of anti-Asian hate and racism, as well as looking for long-term solutions using policy, impact litigation, and public awareness. Our ALIP helplines, operated by multilingual staff in Asian languages and dialects, including Korean, are able to provide culturally and linguistically responsive services and help victims navigate complex legal and public systems. One of our most powerful tools is our bystander intervention training, which in multiple languages teaches individuals what they can do to safely intervene should they witness an act of anti-Asian hate. We call these the 5 Ds. First is distract. Create a distraction to take attention away from the victim. So if I see on the street someone talking in an animated voice and intimidating an Asian woman, what I could do is, as I walk by them, drop my purse or drop my coffee as if by accident. And for a moment, the attention will be drawn towards me and away from the individual. And sometimes that momentary break is enough to allow the victim to quietly and safely exit the situation. 2, delegate. I could enlist the help of somebody else or an authority figure to help me. So if I'm on the bus and I see somebody swearing at a Korean grandmother, I could walk up to the bus driver and say, hey, you need to pull over the bus because there's a situation back here that you need to address. 3rd, document. I could capture the details of the event and offer them later to the victim or to the authorities. Just remember, if you videotape the incident on your phone, do not post it without first getting the victim's permission. The 4th D is delay. After the incident is over, I could go up to the victim to see how I can help. When Hong Lee in Los Angeles was verbally accosted by a man at a Mexican restaurant, she said that after he left, what scared her the most was the thought that he might be waiting for her in the parking lot to re-engage with her. So what she needed then as a delay tactic is somebody to escort her to her car. And 5th, the last D is direct. If you feel that it's safe to do so, you can directly confront the harasser and tell them to stop. Over 160,000 people have taken bystander intervention training across this country. And this simple but effective training to address anti-Asian hate is something we can all do. We can't delegate the safety of our friends, our family members, and our community to politicians and police officers and think that alone will resolve the problem. We must all fight racial injustice and commit to ending insidious racism. It's something we must all prioritize for ourselves and for future generations. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I witnessed the 1992 LA uprising or Haigu firsthand. And I remember my parents talking at church or with some of their relatives, and they talked about who had lost their business, who had taken up arms, who had insurance to rebuild, and what would happen to those who didn't. And when I grew up, I went to law school and I wanted to become a civil rights public interest lawyer. I fought for racial justice, immigrant rights, women's rights, and other social issues. But I didn't love being a lawyer. So I left the legal services and I became the executive director of a Korean social service organization. And I worked at Korean American Family Services, or KFAM, also known as 한인 가정 상담소, for 11 years. And I loved my job working with the Korean American community. And I had no intention of leaving, but then the pandemic hit. And in August of 2020, I took on the job at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Southern California because I felt like I needed to return to my civil rights roots. Because what we all just experienced during this pandemic is history in the making. And when my kids and my grandkids get to that chapter in their history books that talk about the rise in anti-Asian hate and the Black Lives Matter movement and the COVID pandemic, and they ask me, what was it like to live through that? It was important to me to be able to say I was doing something as part of the solution. When future generations ask you what it was like to live through this period of anti-Asian hate and this pandemic, and what you did to make this country better, what will your answer be? Thank you very much.
이 콘텐츠는 아시안 증오범죄 근절 프로그램의 일환으로 캘리포니아주에서 지원받아 제작되었습니다.